Hello, and welcome to this edition of Open Source in Oman, a monthly series of video interviews brought to you by the Open Source Center of Excellence in Oman, a partnership between the Oman Ministry of Transport, Communication and Information Technology and Wipro Limited. I'm your host, Gilles Gravier, Open Source Strategy Advisor at Wipro. Our guest today is Khalid AL-Tamimi, who is Director of IT at Oman's Ministry of Health in the Directorate General of Health Services in Al-Dakhliya governorate. Wow, that's a hard one for me to pronounce. Hello, Khalid. In your role, you've been very naturally, significantly involved in open source activities, and we'll discuss that during our session today. So, if you want, as an introduction, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? How originally you got into open source?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very glad to be in this interview organized by the Center of Open Source Excellence. So how I got started with the open source? Back to the old days when I was a student at the technical college, I studied Linux operating system, and we were introduced to some Linux command, and I did some Linux scripting. Then at the same study days, I have studied PHP and MySQL, which it is also a development programming language. By using the combination of LAMP, which it is Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, I did my graduation project at that time, which was pharmacy and medical store system for web-driven system. After I completed this project, I made it available as open source for next batch of students to be developed and to be enhanced further. Then after that, I have put this project in one of the open source repository. What I have seen is a lot of contribution from outside Oman. And really, it was driven for me for the open source concept. So that is how actually get into the open source technology, Jim.
Oh, cool. Okay, so really like very technical at the beginning. What's the personal motivation for you when it comes to your open source activities today? Why are you doing open source today, and has it changed over time?
Well, I think the wisdom which it says knowledge for all was my personal motivation for the open source. At the beginning, my personal motivation, it was to learn and to help and to help the others to implement and to adapt the open source technology. In addition to that, I am actually a PHP developer, as I mentioned earlier. And whenever I am stuck in any PHP code, I will request for help from the PHP community. And what I have noticed that I will get the answer very rapidly. And similar things, similar scenario, I'm helping the others to overcome some of the PHP issues. Now in my organization, transferring from the commercial software or proprietary software to open source, this is another motivation for me. As answer for your question, did it evolve over the time? Yes. As I told you before, that helping the others, it was my personal motivation for this. Now I used to conduct free courses for the community and for non-profit organizations related to the open source. For example, I'm giving free courses related to Linux for beginners, like basics commands of Linux, speaking about some Linux distribution like Ubuntu. Additionally, I'm giving courses related to the web development like PHP and MySQL, WordPress, Joomla, Model for some educational institution. So actually, all of those reasons, it was my driven to continue and to motivate with the open source technology.
Wow, cool. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your organization, the Ministry of Health? and its use of open source. What does the role play? What role does open source play in the ministry?
Yes. Actually, when we speak about Ministry of Health in any country, the main role for Ministry of Health is to provide a healthcare service for the public. And one of the primary objective to improve the quality of the health service is to have a good and sustainable health information system. So here in Oman, Ministry of Health has taken the strategic decision to develop in-house HIS, which for short we call it Shifa, which means in English the cure. This system we have developed by ourselves. We used some of the open source stack, some of the open source technology. We were using a proprietary software as open source. And we struggled a lot because it was not stable. Especially we have some healthcare institution located in remote places, in mountains, and always there is, electricity breakout. So with the commercial software, with the commercial operating system, our HIS, it was not stable. Therefore, we have moved from the commercial operating system, which I don't want to mention it, we moved to Linux operating system. And when we moved to Linux operating system, we discovered it is not just a reduction of the cost, but some unexpected benefits like freedom of choice, security, flexibility, maintainability in our infrastructure. And now there is around 75 locations here in Oman running a cluster server with high availability service. Also, we have implemented many open source, stacks, many open source, product like Zabbix, which it is, an open source network monitoring system. Mm-hmm. And not only that, actually, we could also replace the Office program, which it is one of the very international famous commercial software Office program. We have moved it to LibreOffice. And before LibreOffice, we are using the OpenOffice. And proudly now, I can say in some locations, not all, in some locations, Ministry of Health, we are using LibreOffice. It was a big change. And we face a lot of challenges, to convince the staff to move to the open source, Office program, which it is LibreOffice. That's it.
Cool. Okay. So now about yourself, right? In your role today in the ministry, how did you arrive at that role? And can you tell us how that role specifically involves open source? You've given some hints already, but so how did you get there in the ministry, and what role do you play in the open source activities?
Yes, actually, when I joined Ministry of Health, I found the Ministry of Health has taken a strategic decision to implement Linux operating system as as OS for the servers. Mm-hmm. And I was supporting this project. Plus, as I mentioned before, actually I'm a PHP and MySQL developer. I have developed some application related to the health. One of those system is data warehousing and business intelligence using open source. Proudly, this system, it is implemented in most of the health service region here in Oman, using all open source technology in it. I have compared this system with one of the commercial systems that ministry was having before. It did a lot, actually, because Open source, it gives you the freedom, it gives you the flexibility. You are not tied with any license or with any subscription. After this, I have developed another system, which is as well serving the patient inside the hospital, which it is queue management system, as well using some of open source tools.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to this, actually, I used to conduct some some courses related to the open source in Ministry of Health. And usually the ministry, they are taking my opinion whenever they want to transfer from commercial to open source platform. So that is how I evolved to the role of open source in Ministry of Health.
Wow. Okay. So what are the biggest challenges you face today in that role, and what helps you resolve them successfully?
Yes, I think one of the challenges or one of the issues that we are having is changing the culture of the staff to change from the proprietary software to open source. Uh, because they get used to the commercial software or to the proprietary software since long time, and this is a big challenge. Uh, most of the staff they used to get, for example, if we speak about the LibreOffice, since the schools and childhood, since the higher education, they used to have a knowledge of proprietary software. Therefore, when they will move to open source, it will be a little bit difficult. But how we have overcome of this issue? I think listening to the end users and understanding their difficulties, it is going to overcome such kind of issues. So we have come all of those issues by proper, managing for the change. We have overcome many issues related to implementation of open source by taking the feedback and by gathering some questionnaire from the end users. Another challenge is, and I think this is a global challenge, uh, many open source software, there is no local support for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a challenge, but from other side, I can look at as opportunities for local companies, local small and medium enterprise to take the lead of local support. And it is a good, opportunity between, public sector and private sector to come out from this challenge or this issue. So that is how actually, or those two kind of issues that I'm having right now related to the open source.
Thank you, and I clearly understand that, definitely. Apart from the project you're working on, for work, um, uh, what is your favorite, your personal favorite open source project? You have like one open source tool you love to use at home or for other things than just work?
Yeah, I think Ubuntu operating system
Uh-huh.
is one of my favorite open source project, and always I used to advise all the people who want to migrate from commercial operating system to open source. Always I used to advise them to go and install Ubuntu. I found it, very close to Windows operating system, which it is very common. So, and Ubuntu, it has been evolved a lot. Always there is a regular update, and there is a strong community support as well, open source community support for Ubuntu.
Okay, that's a really good one, actually. Thank you. Um, maybe to conclude this kind of discussion, I have two questions for you. The first one is, do you have an ask for our audience? What could they do to make your open source activities easier or better or more efficient?
First of all, I would like to encourage the audiences to use the open source. I think most of the people now, they are having Android phones, which maybe they don't know that the Android is one of very famous open source project. So that is my encouragement to the audiences to start and to use the open source project. Moreover, I'm encouraging them to contribute with the open source. If they are not a programmers, they might not be a programmers. They might be regular, people. What they can do is they can join some of the communities which they required some localization for their open source project. They might require some translation. So they can contribute in this. They might not going to write any one line of code, but I think they are going to add a lot in case if they have contributed as a translator for some of the open source project, especially if we speak about the Arabic community. We have a lot of software, a lot of open source software, which they are not, translated to Arabic. So I think this is a good opportunity for them.
Well, that's actually the next question I was going to ask you is how would you suggest people start contributing if they haven't done so before? And your example is perfect. And it actually goes very well with, I think it was the first guest we had for this series of interviews, which was Sophie Gauthier from the LibreOffice Document Foundation, actually, who said that there's actually a need for helping translate and localize LibreOffice in the Arabic world. So definitely, I really like that idea and your suggestion, and it goes very well with what projects really need today. So thank you very much. And on this super positive and interesting note, I think this concludes today's recording session. So I want to thank you very, very much for having taken the time to talk with me today and to explain your activities. Any last words you would have for our audience just before we conclude?
It is just the last sentences that I was saying. Please use the open source. Read more about the open source. Supporting the open source, it means supporting the or breaking the let's say the barrier of having a software which everybody has to pay for it. So I'm very glad again, Gilles, for this very nice interview with you. And I would like to thank Wipro and the Center of Open Source Excellence here in Oman. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much.